Namaste. Today I'm going to try and very quickly go through a new how to use a new free plugin that I just released for the Pinegrow web editor that adds in several elements to make loading responsive images on your web pages a little easier. And this plugin implements two different things. One, an HTML5 picture tag, which takes sources and images to be able to decide what best to deliver to the browser, as well as adding SRCset attribute to the existing image tag. That again allows the browser to really select what image is going to be best and smallest for the device that the browser is being run on. So how do we use the plugin, or how do we load the plugin? So you open up your Pinegrow as we've done here, click on File and go to Manage Libraries and Plugins. Then down at the bottom of that pop-up, you'll see Load Plugin, click on that. And then you want to navigate to where you downloaded and unzipped the file that came from the website. Now I'll leave the link to the plugin in the comments. I'm also going to be writing a tutorial that I'll link to in the comments. But basically, any of these plugins you want to have in their own developer folder. They're not going to be associated with a single project. That can be associated with multiples. So you want to put them in a plugin and leave, in a folder and leave them there. If you need to update, all you then have to do is delete out that folder and put in the new folder that you download, and next time you open up Pinegrow, it'll load in the new files. So let's go ahead and navigate there. So within the inner SRCset folder, there's this file, SRCset Pinegrow plugin.js. Go ahead and open that, hit add. You'll get a warning, click OK. Now we have this available to us in our pages and projects. Let's first go ahead and start a new page. We're just going to use plain HTML. You could use Bootstrap. You could use Foundation. Click on that. So what does Pinegrow give us out of the box? So if we look for the picture tag, we see it won't come up. So that's not available in base HTML. As you saw just a second ago, of course the image tag is. If we drag that onto our web page, we'll see that Pinegrow nicely puts in a placeholder image for us. And then looking over on the Properties tab over here on the right, we see that there's a source URL, our alt text attribute, a width attribute, and a height attribute that we can easily fill in. If we look at the text, you can see that right now, since we have none of those filled in, we just have that source there in the image tag. Okay, so what does this look like after we turn the new plugin on? Again, go back to that Manage Libraries and Plugins. You're going to have to do this for every single page or project. You won't have to reload the plugin on opening Pinegrow, but you will have to activate it for the page. So go ahead and activate it. Now we can see a whole bunch of additional options have popped up. SRCset options, where you can take up to 10 SRCsets and up to 10 size rules. This is a sort of arbitrary number, and this is a no-frills plugin, so I just randomly said, let's give the opportunity to do up to 10. You don't have to fill in all of these. You only have to fill in 1 or 2 or 3, but you can do up to 10, but not over 10. And in a future plugin, I'll probably address this and make this a little more dynamic. Okay, so what does the SRCset do? Let's start by replacing out the placeholder that Pinegrow gave us. I'm just going to navigate to some images that I resized earlier. And while I wouldn't normally deliver them over the web, let's just use these JPEG files. Okay, so I'll pick my 1x file here as the source. Load that in. Okay, so there's my flamingo. We'll be good SEO people and put in an alt text. skeptical flamingo. We're going to leave the width and the height empty. Okay. So if you use a source set, basically what the browser is going to do is it's going to see that source set attribute, and it's going to look through each of the files that the source set has paths to and decide which one's best for the browser and basically slot it in place of source. If you have a browser, and I'm looking at you, Internet Explorer, that can't interpret source set, it will use this source as a fallback, and it will display this and not go through the source set options. So you can choose either to put your lowest resolution image there, or you can put a medium resolution image as sort of a compromise, but know that it's going to be displayed as a fallback. Okay, so now let's fill in a couple of these source set fields. So go to the file picker, and we're going to, again, stick with these JPEGs here. So we'll put in a 2x, we'll put in the 1x. So that's our lowest resolution file. We'll do two more, 2x. And if I was doing a full project, I would, of course, copy these over into my resources, but for right now I'm just using the absolute link since I don't have this saved as a project. All right, so now I have 3 files here. So the important thing for this source set is now we have to tell the browser for each of those files when to use them. And so first we'll start with the original way that you can tell that, and that's by assigning a pixel density. And so sort of arbitrarily, I'm going to say that this first image has a pixel density of 1x, next one up is 2x, and the next one up is 3x. So pixel what? What does that mean? So this original file was, for example, 1,000 pixels wide. And for right now, I'm just calling that 1x density. And what that means is that anytime the browser goes to pull down a copy of the file, it'll look at the screen resolution, and if it's a rather low number of pixels per inch, it's going to assign that a screen density of 1x. Now, a lot of Apple devices have Retina screens, and those Retina screens are at least 2x, which means, for example, if the screen here was 320 pixels wide and it had a pixel density that basically was 320 pixels over the width of that screen, that would be a 1x. This one, if it was 320 pixels wide, because it's 2x, would mean that it would take at least 640 pixels to fill it. Okay, so double the number of pixels. So this file is 2,000 pixels wide. So you've got 1,000 pixels wide, 1x, 2,000 pixels wide, 2x, I'm sure you can guess, 3,000 pixels wide, 3x. So now the browser can decide what the resolution of the screen is and serve up the file that's going to look good on that screen, but hopefully not go into overkill and serve too big a file. So now, if we look at our actual code here, we have the image, we have this fallback source, we have our alt tag, our alt attribute, and then for the source set we have a path to that first file, the 1x, and then our space, and then that density, 1x, comma, next file path and density, third file path and density. So now the browser can decide, depending on the density of the screen, it can deliver what it needs to. One problem with only allowing the browser to assign based on what the density of the screen is that you can have a screen that's, again, 320 pixels wide with a screen density of 2x. And you can also have a screen that's 5,000 pixels wide with a density of 2x. They'll both get this image. And in one case, it's going to be overkill. And in the other case, it may be underkill. So really, pixel density isn't always the best way to go. And luckily, the source set gives us another option that actually expands our opportunities, and that's with width. So I can say, okay, this one is 1,000 wide. This one is 2,000 wide. And this one is 3,000 wide. Okay, and so now we can see our source set list has changed. We still have the path, but now it says 1,000 wide, 2,000 wide, 3,000 wide. And really, if we change our resolutions up here, we're not going to see any difference. But where using widths now allows us to do something extra is we can now use these sizes and media queries. And basically, these look a lot like regular media queries where you can specify when the particular images should be shown at what you can base how the images are shown depending on conditions on the screen. So you can do things like orientation, landscape, so you can have it shown one way if it's landscape, whereas if it's portrait, it's shown a different way. We'll just quickly do one because I'll have more of this in my tutorial on the website. We'll just do a really quick one. We'll say, okay, if our max width is at a large phone tablet or less, so I think that's 768, then we want to display this photo pretty big. We want to be able to see all the details, so we're going to do it full width. And one thing that's necessary to point out here is that within these size and media queries, our size rules can't use percentages. So you have to use EM, or in this case, view width, something other than percentages to determine how that file is going to be presented. Okay, so here I'm saying if we're on a tablet or smaller, I want it full size. And then I can say, okay, however, if we're bigger than that, I don't need the image as large, so we're just going to show it for half the screen. Okay, so now you can see we have this sizes attribute that's set to our two rules. And so basically this is this last rule that doesn't have anything before it is sort of the fallback. So it says, if our sizes don't match this, then do this. And you can have numerous rules that, again, govern things like orientation. Okay, now let's see what happens. So if we're on extra small, we match the rule. If we're on small, we match the rule. Now if we jump up to medium, we should see that it jumps to half the size because we're saying we only want it displaying on 50% of the screen, and that'll be true on extra large as well. It's going to take up half the screen because of this size rule. This is going to be independent of which of these three images are picked. These three images are simply going to be picked for which image best fits into that particular 100 view width or 50 view width based on the resolution and size of the screen. Okay, so that's the image tag. What about the picture tag? So if we go back here, we now have this picture and picture source tags. So we're going to drag the picture in. You can see what it's made up of. So the picture is made up of two different elements, a picture source and a picture source and an image tag. So the image tag is basically going to act like the source here for image when we're using SRCset, and it's going to be the fallback. So if our browser can't interpret picture or can't interpret SRCset, again looking at Internet Explorer, you'll have this fallback to the image tag here. One thing that's very important to think about is how this works behind the scenes. When the browser loads this in, it's going to look through our sources, and we can have multiple sources, pick which the best image is, and put it into the source here of our image tag, essentially. That means if you're using a framework that puts classes onto your images to modify them, you're going to want to make sure that the class is on this guy, this image tag, not on the source tag. So you can say, for instance, I think this is right, something like image fluid if you're using Bootstrap. That's going to then control different aspects of how that image acts. Okay? All right. So going back to the source, this is where things really start happening, and it's much the same as SRCset. You again have your file, and it can be one or more, and the same sort of thing. You can add in your various files. Oops, should do this one. And you'll see that it, oops, that's weird. Sometimes unless you refresh in between it'll won't pick these values up. So you can see it makes the same sort of source set list that we had before. So now one difference with source versus image when you're using a source set is you can have a media rule. And so basically what that'll do is it'll say use this set of source set files to pick which file to use if our media rule is met. So in this case, as long as we are larger than that phone tablet size. So as long as we're bigger than 800 pics, pick one of these. And then the other thing that I should point out that's required in the HTML standard is when you're delivering through a source set in a source, you need to pick the source type. So in this case, we're delivering JPEG files. So now that's going to tag on here that type attribute as image JPEG, and this has to be a MIME compliant type, which this is. And then if you want to, you can also add sizes and media queries, just like we did before, to change how it shows on different screens. So why would you want to use this as opposed to using a straight image tag? Well, this allows for two things. One, so if we drag another picture source down here, what we could now do is a couple of things. One, we could say, okay, JPEGs are great, or PNGs are great, but they're a little large. So instead of, or JPEGs are great, but they're a little large. So let's instead also give the browser the opportunity that if it can to display that same image as a PNG. So now what we're saying, and we're going to change that to 1000 wide. And now we're going to say type PNG. So now what we're saying is that if possible, and if the browser supports it, we can serve up a PNG, which is generally smaller, rather than a JPEG. Another place this is really great is if we have images that are in the newer WebP format, we can again say serve those up as opposed to the other larger files, as long as our browser supports it. And again, we can go in for different media rules as well as different size rules. The other place this is really useful is we can say, okay, let's look at art direction. Let's look at changing what is displayed depending on what the device is. So I'm just going to open up this file. Actually, you know what? It'd be better if I opened it this way so we can see it. 1 second, sorry about this. Should have had this open already. Okay, so what art direction allows you to do is it allows you to say, okay, if I'm on a desktop, we want to include a lot of background to put our focal subject sort of in a nice setting. However, if we try and display the same image down on a phone, we're going to lose the dog, right? It's going to be really tiny and we're not going to be able to see the focus. So for each device, and depending on the orientation of the device, we want to be able to serve up a different sized file. That's what picture, the other place where picture really is great. So we can say, okay, here, instead of this flamingo, if we're, say, on a small screen that has a max width of 800 pics, we want to serve up then this image. And again, we could have a single image, or we could select multiple different images with different resolutions. And again, you can put as many of these sources as you want within a particular picture tag. So you could change every single device into a different image. You can put different orientations. For example, so this means it'll only show this if you have a landscape orientation on a max width of 800. So you can really mix and match, and let's just see that that works. So now we're going to drop down. So right now we're looking at a large screen. I'm not sure if this is the JPEG or the PNG image. I guess it'd be the JPEG. But now if we go ahead and drop down to a small screen, you can see that this redisplays based on that second rule where it says below 800 pics in width, so we're at 768, display this photo. If we're above 800 pics, then display this photo. So you can use this to really make your site very responsive. And with that, I will wrap up. Meta, happy programming. Thanks for listening.